I love this saying, the cave that you fear to enter holds the gold you seek. And the idea behind that is oftentimes the things that you're most nervous or afraid about are exactly the things that you should do.
When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast. Thank you for tuning into episode 66 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snellings Law. I'm your host, Scott Snellings. My guest today is Brian Beckom, a computer scientist, philosopher, and trial lawyer based in Houston, Texas. Brian's law firm, VB Attorneys, has obtained hundreds of millions of dollars for the firm's clients, including many record-breaking results. Brian also hosts Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckom, a popular podcast featuring military leaders, sports stars, New York Times bestselling authors, scientists, and more. Brian is a former Texas A&M basketball player, and he is currently a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a single-digit golfer, and an accomplished fly fisherman. Brian, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast, my friend.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here, man. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah. So my daughter was in jiu-jitsu for several years, and it was amazing to me whenever I would go watch the adult classes, usually before her class started. The ones who had the higher level belts, you know, the brown belts, the black belts, they made it look so easy. Everything was calculated. Everything was just stress-free to them, it felt like. And the ones with the lower belts, especially when they were sparring or rolling with the higher belts, they looked like they were struggling every single minute of the match.
Yeah.
Tell me, what's your experience been with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Yeah, so I actually wrote an article about this. It's called Grappling with Fear. And I started jiu-jitsu when I was 47. Been an athlete my whole life, played basketball in high school and college, and then played for a little bit after that, picked up some different sports, but had always been interested in martial arts. And finally, I had the courage to walk into a jiu-jitsu studio. What I did is I just Googled jiu-jitsu near me. Turns out the best jiu-jitsu studio in Texas and one of the best in the country is about 10 minutes from my house. So I walk into this place. I don't know anybody. Half the people there look like they could kill me just by looking at me. And I didn't know anybody there, super intimidated, didn't know how to put on the uniform, didn't know how to tie the belt. I get out there in my first class, and I'm not a small guy. I'm 6 foot, about 210 pounds. Like I said, still fairly athletic. I get paired up with a bald computer science guy who I outweigh by about 50 pounds. I'm about, 5 inches taller than this guy. And we do this drill in the first class, which is called side control. And basically, one guy gets on top of the other guy and tries to keep him from being able to escape. And then you switch places. And, I kind of thought, man, I'm pretty athletic, pretty strong, pretty explosive. I'll be able to push this guy off of me just using strength. And within about 30 seconds, I was tapping just out of pure exhaustion. I could not believe this, Scott. I mean, it was like, I can't believe how this person who I am a better athlete than, I'm bigger than, can completely physically dominate me. And what happens in jiu-jitsu, and I've done it long enough now to see this again and again, is people come in and they have my experience and one of two things happens. Either their ego gets in the way and they never come back, or they do what I did and they say, this is magic. I mean, I gotta learn how to do this. Like, you don't realize how helpless you are against somebody who's got some training in this. And, when I first started, Scott, like you said, and we call them spazzy white belts. You basically have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea how to move your body or where to go. You don't know what the other person's doing. And so like you're wasting so much energy and you're just getting tapped again and again and again. I mean, I was getting tapped every single day for 6 months and it was tough. But I'll tell you, once you start learning about body dynamics and leverage, it truly is like magic. I mean, I'm a purple belt now, And the way the ranks work is it's white belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt. Purple belt is considered an expert in jiu-jitsu. And once you've gotten your purple belt, it's just kind of a matter of time until you get your black belt. But once I became a blue belt, I started being able to do things I could not believe I could do. And, today, because I'm a bigger guy, oftentimes the newer white belt, the big white belts, the 260, 270, 6'5" guys, they pair them with me. And I beat every single one of them without exception if they're new. It truly is like magic. And if you go against a black belt, so today at lunch, I train at lunch every day. I went against a black belt today, a Brazilian guy, he's a friend of mine, and he makes me look like a white belt. So
it's one of those things.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's really attractive to people that are intelligent, because knowledge truly, it's a one-to-one relationship. Like the more you know, the better you are. And like you said, I can go against white belts now and not even get tired, really, because, and I'll try to let them make some moves and stuff like that. But you learn how to use your body, you learn how to conserve energy, you learn how to use what we call frames, which is basically like if you're trying to do any damage to me, I've got arms and hands and legs and stuff framed in front of you. And it's been one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And your listeners can look up the article, Grappling with Fear, starting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at 47. But it's been an awesome experience, and I've got to meet a lot of really good people. Yeah. It's also helped me, by the way, Scott, it's helped me a lot in my law career.
I can absolutely see that. The mindset and the shifting of how you're looking at problems, and how when you're being quote unquote attacked on the litigation side of things, how you can think through that a little bit more clearly without the stress of feeling like you just have to react, right?
Yeah,
and that's one of the things that, when we enrolled my daughter in it, that I really, really wanted is, we could do Taekwondo, we could do Tai Chi, Muay Thai, any of those, but I wanted her to be in jiu-jitsu simply because of what you just talked about. Size doesn't really matter once you know what you're doing. And so let me ask you this. You mentioned that you started that at 47 years old. I started a new sport when I was in my mid-30s. I started playing ice hockey. Never played it before. I'm a Texas kid, right? Always loved it. Yeah. Wanted to play it, so decided I was going to do it. Completely uncomfortable. What made you want to, at 47 years old, go walk into a gym and put yourself in that situation where you were just completely uncomfortable, didn't know much of anything?
That's actually a great question, and I've thought about it a lot. And I think there's a great saying, and sometimes I don't live this like I'd like to, but I love this saying: the cave that you fear to enter holds the gold you seek. And the idea behind that is oftentimes the things that you're most nervous or afraid about are exactly the things that you should do. So, I find myself at 40, I'm 52 now, I turned 52 like this past Saturday. At 47, I found myself kind of heading in a direction I didn't want to head. I was getting older, a little bit out of shape. I wasn't in quite the shape I wanted to be in. And I just felt like I needed a new challenge. And like I said, the first 6 months I wasn't injured, but I was in severe pain. Yeah. Severe pain after every single class. And I was thinking to myself, like, man, is this ever going to get any better? And what I decided, Scott, was I'm going to push through and see if my body adjusts to it, which it has, by the way, but it took quite some time. But it's kind of like, I tell my I have two boys right now that are Texas A&M and the Corps of Cadets, which is a super duper challenging experience for a young college student. Yeah. And I tell my boys, though, that the only thing, in my opinion, really that is meaningful are things that are hard. And so to me, it was like, this is just another one of life's challenges. I need to try something hard. I'll tell you something that was really crazy is after a year and a half of jiu-jitsu, I went up to Dallas and fought in a public jiu-jitsu tournament. And I remember the night before, I was lying in bed going, what the hell am I doing? I'm a father of 3 kids. I'm a lawyer, and I'm about to go fight some Brazilian guy in a jiu-jitsu tournament. I was so nervous, man. But again, that's exactly the type of thing I think we as driven people and trial lawyers need to do. I don't know about you, Scott, but I've been trying cases for 25 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I still get nervous before every single trial, like every single trial.
Yeah.
But
and
it's hard.
agree.
Like Trey, you know how hard trials are.
Oh, yeah.
But boy, when you win a case after going through that crucible, I mean, it's the best feeling ever. When I was done with my jiu-jitsu tournament, I was driving home from Dallas to Houston. I felt so good. I mean, I just felt like you know what I mean? So
yeah,
for me, life is about pushing yourself, doing things that you're uncomfortable with. It's easy, I think, when you get to be in my situation, maybe your situation, where you got a good business, good family, you're making money, go play golf twice, that sort of thing. It's easy not to push yourself. And so one of the things I like to tell people is success can be a problem, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you get too successful, all of a sudden you stop pushing yourself, you get complacent, and then you don't grow. So jiu-jitsu was just another kind of opportunity for me to do things that make me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, we just ran. I say we, my business coach and I, we just ran the Marine Corps marathon. I'd never run a marathon before.
Nice.
Never been a runner my entire life, really, until a couple of years ago when I had a buddy get me into it, and we were training for, at that point in time, my longest race, 10K, 6 miles.
Yeah,
never run 6 miles straight before, and it provided me with that challenge. It was a goal that had to be reached that I'd never reached before. And it required this specific discipline, specific commitment, especially the marathon training. Man, that was a grind. That was 20 weeks of just a grind. But you get through that grind, you cross that finish line. And at the Marine Corps, you run those 26 miles, and those last 0.2, they take you basically straight up a hill to get to the finish line. But then you drop off in front of the Iwo Jima monument, which is super cool. But I remember crossing that finish line, and it's just this amazing wave of, dang, man, it paid off. All that hard work paid off. And before I was away from that monument, my mind is asking, what's the next challenge? What's the next challenge?
Nice.
And so I think that's just kind of a part of that mentality. I don't know if it's a trial lawyer mentality or just a driven mentality, but always having that, where can I push myself? And it doesn't just have to be physically, right? It can be mentally, it can be spiritually, whatever it is in your life that you've become complacent in. And I think that provides so much value, because that's where you really figure out who you are and you build those mental assets. Now, when I'm on a long run, I'm like, hey, I've done 26.2. Maybe I'm not in as good of a shape as I was when I ran it, but I know I can do it. And so, what's the next challenge? And for lawyers, man, there are so many lawyers that are out there scared to try in a case. So many lawyers scared to try in a case. And then you go do it. And even if it's terrible, even if you lose, all of a sudden you have that notch in your belt. Say, okay, now I'm going to go get better. I'm going to get better. I'm going to get better. And so I just think that is a paramount attribute if you're going to really excel in whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if your experience has been like this, but when I win a case, so I've been keeping a journal after every single trial. And when I win a case, my journal says, basically, you're great, you're awesome, what a great, blah, blah, blah. I don't learn much is the point.
Yeah.
When I lose a trial, I have, 10 pages of notes. Do this better. You can do this better. This is a better. I actually learn way more by losing trials than I do by winning trials. And it's the same exact thing in jiu-jitsu. When I go into a jiu-jitsu class today and I'm going against a number of white belts, I'm learning a little bit, but not quite as much as when I go against a black belt and get submitted, 3 or 4 times in 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, now I got to learn how to do this. Now I got to learn how to do that. So I'm competitive. I have an ego. I don't like to lose, but I try to keep in mind that there's really no such thing as losing. There's winning, and then there's learning.
Right.
And, that's easy to say. And like I said, I don't like to lose, but I learn far more from my quote losses than I do from my wins.
It's gut wrenching, man. There's nothing worse than hearing a jury read out a verdict and, feeling like you've just completely let your client down, right? They're depending on you to walk them through this process to victory. And even though they know the risks, we know the risks, it is just absolutely gut wrenching, especially for that first 24 hours or so while you're trying to process it and work through it before you really do the autopsy on everything that went wrong, what went right. it is absolutely devastating. And I think the fear of that feeling is what keeps so many people out of the courtroom.
For sure. For sure. And those people, they'll avoid those negative feelings that you're talking about. So I'll give you a good example of that negative feeling. A couple of years ago, I tried a case for a month in San Francisco federal court for a guy that had a super bad back injury. And we tried a great case. We're waiting for the jury to come in. The jury comes in. They read the verdict. Was the company negligent? Yes. Was your client negligent? Yes, which we kind of expected a little contrib.
Mm-hmm.
What are the damages? $8 million. And now we're thinking, we're about to get a huge verdict. What are the percentages of liability? 5% on the company, 95% on your client, Beckham. So I go literally while they're reading the verdict, Scott, I go up to a high. I just got $8 million verdict, and then it gets reduced. Now it's a $500,000 verdict. And so that's tough, right?
Yeah.
That's really tough. Those are bad feelings. Flying back from San Francisco after spending $500,000 on this case, almost getting an $8 million verdict, but not quite, is tough. But you flip that around, and 2 or 3 years ago, I got a $44 million verdict. Like, in other words, if you're not willing to feel the feelings and the emotions of losing, you'll never get the highs of the big wins either. So it's kind of like you got to be willing to go through the crucible in order to get, like I said, to the gold in the cave that you fear to enter.
And I think that holds true for, that's a great trial lawyer perspective, holds true for no matter what it is you're doing, right? The tough conversations. Yeah. That's a great example right there. Nobody likes having the tough conversations. If you do, you're just kind of a little weird. But putting yourself out there and making it happen. Go have the dadgum conversation. Don't just let it sit there, simmer. Go do that thing on your to-do list that you absolutely don't want to do, that you've been putting off. Eat the frog, if you will. We say that in the office quite a bit. I don't know if you've read that book or not. Eat the frog. But using that same mentality of making yourself uncomfortable to progress, whether in the business or progress with yourself or whatnot. So, Brian, tell me this.
There's a great book I read on this that I think is worth talking about just a little bit. There's I think he considers himself a statistician, maybe. Nassim Taleb. He wrote a book called Black Swan. He wrote another. He's written 3 or 4 books, but he wrote this book that really changed the way I viewed the world. It was called Antifragile. Really good book. And the basic hypothesis of the book is there's things that don't break under pressure, but ultimately they will break under pressure. So there's things that are very very strong. And then there's things that break easily under pressure, things that are very fragile. And then the third category is the important one. There's things that get stronger when pressure is applied. So, the quintessential example of that is when you lift weights, you're putting stress on your muscles, but your muscles get stronger. And so I think you don't want to be strong. You don't want to be weak. You want to be anti-fragile. You want to be, you want to take the stresses that are applied to your life and use those to make yourself stronger instead of weaker. So I try to live an anti-fragile lifestyle. That's kind of my overarching mentality as far as this stuff goes.
So where does that come from? Have you always been that way? Is that how you were raised, with that kind of thought process? Or is this something you've developed over the course of your life and career?
I think, not to get into too much of a psychoanalysis, but
you are a philosopher here.
I am a philosopher, and I do like to psychoanalyze things. But I saw my mom die she got cancer when I was 5. Over the course of 5 years, my brother was 8 when she died. I was 10, and my dad, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, raised us both as a single father. And so I saw the way my dad dealt with challenges. My dad was a runner like you, ran 3 marathons, woke up at 6 a.m. every morning and run literally every single morning, and do push-ups and sit-ups and all that stuff. So my dad was always a driven guy, and I saw the way he was like that. And then when I played basketball, my high school basketball coach, one of the big influences in my life, basically taught me that I could do anything I wanted to if I worked hard enough. And so, as a 6'1", relatively good athlete, I end up with a Division I scholarship. How does that happen? It's because my basketball coach convinced me that if I worked hard enough, I could do it. And so I think from a very young age, both watching and being an athlete, I think helps obviously because you have a competitive kind of nature built in a little
Right.
bit. But I've always had this mentality that uh, from watching my dad and from listening to my high school basketball coach, that if I worked hard enough, I could do basically anything I wanted to. And you know what I found, Scott, is I haven't gotten all of the goals that I've set for myself over the last 30 years, but I set really, really, really high goals. And I don't expect to meet all of them, quite frankly. I
Sure.
don't expect to meet most of them. But if you set high enough goals and you don't reach them, but you get close, you're doing better than people that don't set goals at all, or people that don't set their goals high enough. But I feel like, again, here's a little philosophy for you. People are always wondering, like, what's the purpose of life? Like, what are we doing here, right? And I've thought about that question a lot. I don't know the answer to that question, but one potential answer is getting the most out of whatever you've been given, whatever talents you have. If you try to get the most out of those talents, that is a pretty good compass for living your life. And frankly, that's what I tell my kids. Like, whatever your situation is, whatever talents you have, I feel like you have an obligation to the world to get the most out of those.
It's interesting. You mentioned kind of seeing your dad raise you and your brother, single dad, super driven guy. Did you view your dad as superhero, never struggled with anything, or did he let you in on the challenges that he was facing and the mindset that he carried with those challenges?
That's another great question. So I never thought my dad had an easy life. In fact, I mean, can you imagine being a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, being in charge of nuclear weapons, and then having to go to 80 basketball games a year for your son and never missing a single one? So to me, it was more like it wasn't really. I will say, don't let me forget this. There's one lesson my dad, the most important lesson my dad gave me, I want to tell you about in just a second.
Yeah.
But it was more about, kids don't listen to what you say. They watch what you do. And I just watched what my dad did. And, I could tell there were times when he was busy, when he was struggling, when he was, back when he was in the Air Force, when I was growing up, we were still in the Cold War with Russia. And so we would go to the base movie theater and he could get a call and he would literally have to be over by the plane in 10 minutes. It was called being on alert. So he had a difficult situation because he had to serve as both a mother and a father.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was more about watching him struggle. Now, he was always very, very positive and optimistic about even the challenges he had, but it was more about just watching what my dad did. And, it's funny because my kids who grew up in a nice neighborhood, my boys, nice neighborhood, nice cars, nice girlfriends, all that stuff, they didn't have to get their heads shaved as freshmen and wear military uniforms and be in the Corps of Cadets. You know what? One of the reasons I think they did it is because they saw their dad in there at 47 years old fighting with 25-year-old Brazilian guys. In other words, it really wasn't me telling them they should do it and push themselves. I think it was more them watching dad do it and realize that that's a good way to live, to push yourself. But back to what I said, the one lesson my dad gave me, so my high school basketball coach, the lesson I got from him was basically you could do anything you want if you work hard enough. My dad's lesson was don't quit. Don't quit. And so I never quit on a case. One of the reasons I think my firm gets good settlements is because the defendants know if they beat me in a trial, they're going to have a hard time beating me. And most of the time they're going to settle these cases because they're going to have to. But if we go to trial and they happen to beat me, well, guess what? We ain't done yet because I got 2 appeals at least.
Right.
And so I push everything to the very end. And because of that, I think people that I deal with and people that you deal with, I mean, this, insurance companies, they draw a certain plaintiff's firm, they got records on them. They're like, oh, these people are going to settle the case for half of what it's worth. They see me and they're like, oh God, we got Beckham VB attorneys again. This is going to cost us. We're going to have to go through this whole deal.
Yep.
Get ready to pay, right? And that reputation of persistence and relentlessness. I had somebody tell me this year, they said, Beckham, you are absolutely relentless. And to me, Scott, that's kind of the biggest compliment a plaintiff's lawyer can get.
100%.
You're just relentless, right?
Yeah, because that's the exact thing they don't want to deal with.
Yeah, that's right. They want to deal with, people that aren't in the legal community don't realize that if we don't do anything, neither do they. They just sit. The defense lawyers sit back. Like we have to make everything happen. We have to push everything, or nothing will happen. And like you said, and this is a little public service announcement for some of your listeners. Not all doctors is the same. Not all accountants are the same, and not all trial lawyers are the same.
Yep.
I had somebody call the firm yesterday and ask if I would negotiate my fee. And I said, no, I don't do that. I charge what I charge. You want to go hire somebody to get you $100,000 and they're only going to charge you 20%. How about me getting you $750, but I'm charging you 40%? Are you going to be better off with the first lawyer or the second lawyer?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's amazing. We'll have clients say, okay, hey, how long is this going to take? I'm sure you hear that question all the time. How long is this going to take?
Oh, yeah.
I tell them, well, look, we're not going to file the lawsuit until this point in time. And here's why. We're going to have everything ready to go by the time that lawsuit gets filed. We're going to have our experts. We're going to have reports. We're going to have everything that we need under affidavit. We're going to have this case ready to where we go walk in a courtroom and try it the day after we file it. Because what that allows us to do is set deadlines as quick as we can and push.
Yeah.
Push. To your point, they don't do anything on the other side unless you push them. And when you push them, they get irritated because they have 150, 200 files on their desk and they don't want to have to mess with you. And so that provides what? Leverage. Leverage in jiu-jitsu works just like leverage in trial.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely, it does. 100%. 100%. One of the things about jiu-jitsu is you control the person and you apply pressure, and then eventually they give up. And it's the same thing in the law practice. Pressure, constant pressure. And 9 times out of 10, they give up.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they don't give up, they want to give up. It's just somebody's not letting them give up.
That's right. It's probably some insurance adjuster. One of my favorite things is when insurance adjusters, they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm in trial right now. And, the difference between being the lead lawyer on a case and watching a trial as an insurance adjuster is the difference between watching a fire and being on fire.
Exactly.
Right? Oh, some insurance. Oh, and I used to work just like you. I used to work as a defense lawyer for a little while. And the terrible thing about being a defense lawyer is if you lose, everybody's, oh, I can't believe you lost that case. I can't believe the plaintiff lawyer beat you. If you win, they go, well, you were supposed to win. There's no way to win, right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's not the best situation. That's why I left the defense practice.
Yeah, but, not fulfilling whatsoever.
Not really. Not for me, at least.
All right, one last question. I ask this of all my guests. Yeah. Give me your top 3 books. Could be fiction, nonfiction, any subject matter.
Oh, man. You're asking the right guy and the wrong guy that question. So I read about 100 books a year and have for 35 years. I grew up probably, if there's any if I'm smart at all, the reason is because I read books from a very young age. In fact, when I was in 3rd grade, I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings because my uncle, who I looked up to, was reading them. And that set me on this journey of reading that I like. Reading is one of my favorite things to do. And I actually read hardback books now. I buy hardback books. So, man, I have got so many books I would want to recommend to people. Man, let me just think a little bit because there's so many good ones. So
well, I will tell you that my wife has said no more books in the house. Take them up to the office. We are out of space. Bookshelves are full. I have to have my decorative stuff on the bookshelves too. And so you got to take them all to the office.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so these are maybe not the best books I've ever read, but last year I decided to read 3 of the classics of literature. I read Ulysses by James Joyce. I read Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, and I read Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Moby Dick is a fantastic book still today. Like if your readers or your listeners are interested in older books, Moby Dick is a fantastic read from the perspective of thinking and the future and stuff like that. There's a great book called The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch, who's a physicist. And he talks about basically everything in the world, but it's a very, very optimistic view of human potential. And, one of the things Deutsch says is there will always be problems, and problems are always solvable. So it's a very, very positive, optimistic way of looking at things. Probably the best work of literature I've read in the last 25 years is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who was a South American. They call him a magical realism, but boy, what an amazing work of literature that is. But we could do a whole 2-hour podcast.
Easy
on books right now. Yeah, I'm reading a great book called Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon right now, which is about Mason and Dixon and the Mason-Dixon line and stuff like that. That's really good. I read a lot of biographies. So I'm reading a biography of David Hume right now, the English philosopher. But boy, 3 books, that would be, it'd be easier for me to give you my top 3 movies and my top 3 books.
Awesome. All right. Well, my friend, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott.
And thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of the Driven Crowd Podcast. We'll talk to you next time.